We can just jump in right into the first question. How'd you get your start into teaching and coaching?
Well, when I played basketball in high school, I told my coach that I wanted to be a high school coach, and I said I'll probably just teach PE or something like that. And he said no, if you're going to be a teacher, you need to really be thoughtful about this and to help kids and to do some good. He says if you want to be PE, that's great, but if there's something else you could do, then consider that. So I thought about math because I really was a big fan of math, stats and numbers. I like all that. And he said, well, if you're an English teacher, it's always the largest department in every school because every kid has to take it all 4 years. So I also happen to like English, so majored in English, and next thing you know, here I am.
Did you ever think that you would do both teaching and coaching at the same time?
Well, I knew I didn't want to coach in college, particularly because the whole thought of recruiting, and that being the life's blood of the college coach, it just didn't really appeal to me. I like working with kids, and I love basketball, so I wanted to be on the court and spend all my attention doing that. So I knew I'd be teaching in high school, and or coaching in high school.
Yes.
And there's very few gigs you can get where you're just the coach and don't have to teach. But as it turns out, I enjoy teaching too. I mean, I've done that for 25 years, and it's been good to me. So yeah, it's been a good run.
So before Walker, just so the audience knows, where did you teach before?
I was at Norcross High School for 6 years. I came to Walker in 2000, and I was here until 2011, and then I left to go to Lancaster, Pennsylvania to become an AD, and then I came back 4 years ago. So I've had 15 years at Walker, 4 in Pennsylvania, and 6 at Norcross.
So going from Norcross, because Norcross is a pretty big school, going from there to the smaller school of Walker, how was that transition for you?
It was a huge change. And the only reason I came here, to be completely honest, was to be the head varsity basketball coach, because I had been an assistant for 5 years at Norcross and knew I was ready. And I didn't go to private school. We didn't know any private schools. We didn't play any when I was at Norcross. The only thing I knew of private schools was Wesleyan, and they would steal our players, so I didn't have a really high opinion of independent schools. And I frankly came here to get the experience of being a head varsity coach, and I figured I'd be here for 2 years, maybe 3, and then go back to public. And so that was the plan. And it's just, as it turns out, it's pointless to make long-term plans like that sometimes, because I came here and I actually felt after 2 years, okay, I'm ready to move back into public, and actually interviewed for a job at Chastity High School, which was a AAA school that was brand new, got it, accepted it, told Walker I was leaving, and then woke up like a day later and said to my wife, I said, why am I going? Am I going just because it was the plan to go back into public school? I said, I really like my team, and I like the place I work. So I had it was kind of embarrassing, to tell the school that I accepted with to say that I've changed my mind. But it was the right thing to do, and I was here for another 9 years after that.
So what, you said you loved your players, you just loved the school in general, but what specifically made you stay longer than the 2 years that you originally planned for?
My first summer here, I took the kids to Clemson, which is where I went to undergrad schools. So it was any chance there was to take a team up there to camp, I'd go to Clemson. And so we walk into Little John Coliseum, and the guys started admiring how really awesome of an arena it is, and they started using calculus to determine how high the center of the roof was.
Wow.
And so the truth is I was kind of put off by that because, again, 6 years at a really large public school where, we're breaking up fights every day, and there were 100 different languages spoken in the school, and it was chaotic, really. And that's what I was used to, and that's the school I had gone to basically in South Florida with 3,300 kids. So that was my life. So it really it was tough to hear my players that I was bringing to compete against really good competition talk about calculus to determine the height of the roof. But then we go out there and we play, and they bust their butts and they work so hard and they're so coachable and they're such great kids that's when it struck me. It's like the way I thought about student athletes wasn't really the only way that it has to be. You can be serious about school in high school you can be a really good kid, you can be kind and generous and all that, and you can still go out there and compete really, really hard. And so that's what I had here. So after 2 years, I said, well, I don't really want to lead that because it's so good. The only reason I left 9 years after that was because I was working here for Gary Blome as an assistant AD, and that dude doesn't age. I mean, he had been here for 30-something years, and he showed no sign
Slowing down,
of even thinking about stepping down as AD. And I said, well, I've been training to be an AD for, I think at that point, 6 years. I said, I guess I got to go. So.
Switching more to the academic side, as you know, you've gone back into teaching your AP Lit class, and I, for one, took it, and I experienced just something totally different in the way the style of your teaching. You know, a lot of Walker teachers, I feel like, have similar styles in a way, and just, you know, usually the typical stereotypical teacher, but you kind of break that mold a lot, and you're way more laid back and casual, but at the same time, you know, a really good teacher. So how'd you develop that style? Is it just something that came naturally to you, or, you know, something that you just thought, you know, this would work?
That's a good question. Probably at Norcross, my first year ever teaching, and actually I got hired late. I was a post-Labor Day hire, and basically the way they do it in big public school systems is, especially in transient public school systems, which Norcross was, is after Labor Day they use those counts. And that's how they determine if that fire people or if they can hire more teachers. So back in, I guess this was 94, they had a lot of move-ins after Labor Day, and they had a half a point from the county, which means they could hire a half-time teacher, and that's how I got the gig. So I was thrown into it, you know, 3 weeks, 4 weeks into the school year, and had to adapt. And it was the first time ever teaching, and it was a pretty difficult and scary environment. So had to make connections to kids really fast. Otherwise, you'd lose them. And it was very transient there. So and we changed classes or kids at the January break, even for year-long classes. So in English, although it's a year-long class, you'd have a whole new roster in January. So you had less time with kids. So I had to figure out ways to make connections really fast. And it just kind of happens, you know. But that probably influenced the way I taught here. And again, not having any independent school background, not knowing what an independent school teacher is supposed to look like, or what those classes are supposed to be, I just came in and taught the way I wanted to. And haven't heard a ton of complaints and haven't been fired yet, so it's been okay.
And this is more, like, again, this is a recent change. You've gone back into the classroom. What made you go back into teaching?
I taught, my first 2 years back here, I think I taught on-level seniors. And then I think a couple of years ago I started teaching an elective for seniors, second semester, called letters, where all we did is write all kinds of letters and read all kinds of letters. But then the opportunity to go back to teaching AP came up, and I think I've done it for 18 or 19 years. And I've taught English language and English literature, and I like to read. And I like to talk about what we read, and I like to write and to comment on what kids are writing. So it's just, there wasn't, I mean, on-level seniors, it's challenging and it's interesting, and we had total freedom to pick the books. But, you know, an AP curriculum is pretty intense, and the opportunity to read 10 or 11 books with students, pretty tough to turn down.
And with the AP, you're giving more range to select books that you want to choose for your students. How's that whole process come to be? Like, how do you go and decide, oh, this is a perfect book for my AP students and all that?
In the past, I've tried to do about half books that I've known and taught, and then half brand new ones. If you don't have a lot of time, if you're coaching and being an AD and things like that, you know, it takes a long time to prepare to teach a book. And to feel comfortable teaching it. And you don't want 10 books that you've never taught before, you know, kind of like experimenting, whatever.
Yeah.
It's not good for anybody. So typically the formula has been about half old stuff and half new stuff. But when I came back to AP Lit 2 years ago, because I was coaching and because I was teaching 2 sections and also in the AD, I just picked books that I had done before at some point in the last 20-something years. So it was the old tried and true that I felt really comfortable with. But now that I'm back in the swing of things and I've got 2 sections or 2 years under my belt again, I think I'll go back to the old formula and try to pick some interesting books. I used to pick books that there weren't Cliff Notes for. That was my only goal.
Yeah.
So instead of reading Color Purple, we read The Third Life of Grange Copeland because Cliff Notes didn't exist. And this was before the internet was big, where you can find, material on anything, and now you can. So that's how I used to pick books. So that's how I ended up teaching, instead of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof or Glass Menagerie, taught Night of the Iguana by Tennessee Williams, because nobody read it. And I thought, well, let's do something different.
And throughout your entire experience of teaching English classes, what's been your favorite book to teach students, or just read along and look through?
What I love is nonfiction. So when I taught AP language, I got to read and teach House, which is about the relationship among architects, clients, and house builders. Oliver Sacks, who's a neurologist and writes about everything under the sun. Books about medicine and sports and history and travel. That's what I really like to read and teach.
So you also say you were really great at math and you love that too. How was it planned to teach math or to teach English? And
math was my first love. So in that informs the way I coach or the way I think about basketball and stats and minimizing risk and trying to find the things you're good at and do more of that and look at the stats that other teams rely on and try to cut those down. So I think I'm very statistically oriented in coaching. And in writing too, I think in terms of variety, it's like literally count the number of words in sentences and say, well, look, you've got 3 sentences in a row in the mid-20s. Like, you can't do that. You got to mix it up a little bit. So I think mathematically. And that tends to be a different type of English class, as you mentioned earlier.
It's very unique because you, like you said, you put in the stats into our writing, which I never heard that before. Any English teacher doing that. Most of the time, English teachers can't stand math. Right. So having the math, lover as my English teacher is crazy.
Well, and just to tell kids, it's one thing to tell students, hey, you need to use variety when you have punctuation. As opposed to, hey, go through that essay and count the number of commas you used and semicolons and colons and dashes and things like that. And then once you see that people are not comfortable with a variety, then you try to attack the reason why. Mostly it's because they don't know the rules, and so they're not willing to take a risk. And so that said, okay, so now we got to go back and we have to teach what these punctuation marks do, and now you'll feel more comfortable taking a risk, and now you'll have better variety.
Now, going now into the AD side of things, the athletic director side of things, where did that passion or that goal to become an athletic director come from?
2003 or 2004, just finished my 4th year here. Basketball was going exceptionally well. Loved coaching. It's still, all the things I do, it's my favorite thing to do. And so I went to the head of school and I said, I really am enjoying coaching, and I think we're getting a lot. The team is growing. We're developing an identity. I said, but teaching 5 classes, including 3 APs, it's tough. I said, is there some way? I said, you can even pay me less. I don't care. Can I get 1 extra planning period? And so that got him thinking. And as it turns out, our old middle school athletic director, Mark Tidwell, who had been here for a long time and was our baseball coach, was leaving the next year. So Mr. Robertson, the head of school, Coach Foy, and Coach Blum and I sat down and said, well, can we work something out? So we changed how we arranged the department. Instead of having a middle school AD, we had an AD, Coach Blum, and 2 assistants, and that was Coach Foy and me. And so the following year, I was assistant athletic director, and found that, again, it's very mathematical. It's logical. It's organizing things. Even the website is, it's graphic design, So it's shuffling a lot of things around, and it's multitasking. And as a coach, that's what we do. So it was a good fit, I think.
And did you ever think, because you left, obviously, Walker, to pursue that AD job, Did you ever think in your wildest dreams that you would come back to Walker and become the AD?
I thought it was possible that we'd come back to the South. And after 4 years in Pennsylvania, we were ready.
Yeah.
My last year there, I slipped on ice, came back from a basketball game, we lost badly, and I was really ticked off, and I wasn't thinking, and I was carrying our trash up a very steep slope, wearing dress shoes at midnight, and slipped and hit my chin and dislocated my, separated my shoulder, cut my chin open, passed out, and then had to crawl up the basement stairs to get into the house to wake my wife who was sleeping.
Oh my goodness.
And like as soon as I came to and I looked around, I'm surrounded by blood and snow and ice, I thought, maybe it's time to go back somewhere.
Let's go somewhere warmer. Yeah.
Which, I mean, it worked out much better, I think. We went a month up there without ever seeing the sun.
Wow.
I mean, it's tough. So I thought we'd come back south for sure. I just didn't know if it would be here.
So you've been here, whether you've, been here originally or, come back and all that, you've been here for a while and you've seen Walker evolve in a sense. What is something that's really stand out to you that's like how Walker has changed throughout the years?
Well, I guess the easy answer is the campus. When I first got here, obviously this building didn't exist. The dining hall, library, in those classrooms above the library. That happened in 2004, I think. And so we called it the new building. And here we are 16 years later, 15 years later, and in my mind, I still call it the new building. And now there's this new building. Primary school didn't exist. The baseball field didn't exist. Didn't own the property at 815. I think the lower school and Coles Athletic Center were only about 5 or 6 years old at that time. So the campus has just exploded, and every chance you have to buy a contiguous piece of land, you have to jump at it and you have to do whatever it takes, and even if you have to hold on to it for years. So the school has done a terrific job of kind of expanding its footprint. So that has been radically different. But, inside the school, I mean, the teachers are different. Mr. Mackey was here the first time I was here in 2000. Mrs. Rogers, a couple other people, but mostly it's all turned over by now. But the quality of the teachers, the relationships among the teachers, and especially the relationship between teachers and students hasn't changed a bit.
Yeah. This is one of the last questions I'll ask, but as an AD, especially as a coach that's coached for so many years, there's usually an argument for like coaching style. Do you go for a coach that is just successful, just wins games, does whatever it takes, or do you go for the coach that can develop their players, in the future on as, both adults or just future athletes in like college and the pros or all that? Where do you stand? What do you believe is more important, developing your players or making sure that they achieve the most success as possible? Because sometimes you can do both, but you have to usually focus more on one or the other.
Well, they're not. I don't think they are mutually exclusive. And I know when we try to hire teacher coaches, a lot of teachers in the school or in any school will say, well, you're going to sacrifice, you're going to find a good coach, you're going to have to take a little bit less in the classroom. And I just don't think that's true. I mean, I think people who can teach can also coach and vice versa. And we want to win. And success is important. And, if we find that there are programs where teams don't win, basically you look at the talent you have relative to the talent you play. And that's how you decide, well, how much winning should there be going on. So you can have teams that are not performing well, so to speak. I mean, they're not winning, but you look at their talent relative to who they play, and they shouldn't be winning. So you can't hold that against the coach. So we want to win, and we think it's really important. And if you have a great coach who's terrific with his players and develops them as human beings, but he's not a good strategist and can't get the team better, I don't want that person. I want someone who's great with kids and loves working with kids, but they're good with their sport and they can get the team playing to the best of its ability, and we want them to be successful. I mean, it's important.